There you go. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of the Art Business podcast. There was meant to be a little bit of a gap in August because the art world, as a lot of people know, closes down in August. But actually, I've kept going because there's been such interesting material coming up. And most recently from today's guest, who is Julia Wendl. And welcome, Julia.
Thank you, David. Hello.
And Julia is both an alumna of the MA Art Business program at Sotheby's Institute of Art in London, of which I'm program director, but she is owner and CEO and auctioneer at the Kunst-Auktionhaus Wendl in Rudolstadt in Thuringia, Germany. I hope my German pronunciation's okay.
That's okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I should get my son up here to help me because he spent a year in Berlin and did German for his undergraduate degree. So
It's all right. As long as you apologize when I don't pronounce English words correctly, then I think you're fine. You can
yeah.
cut each other some slack.
Anyway, so you graduated from the institute in 2016, and your dissertation, I remember, I didn't supervise you. I think I'm right in saying that.
Yes, you're right.
But it already demonstrated your research interests into provenance issues in the art world and the market, especially as related to auction houses. And obviously, we'll return to that, one of those favorite topics of your later in the podcast. So I'm going to start in the usual way by asking you the desert island disc questions. Do you have a favorite city?
Difficult. Honestly, I need to give a very cheesy answer because if it's my favorite city to visit, it's definitely Venice. I have a big soft spot for it. I love water. Water calms me down a lot, and I love historic architecture. So Venice is the obvious choice, and combine that with all the art and the history, and somehow, no matter how crowded it is with tourist season, there's always a little piazza that you can find where there's almost nobody in there. You can still get off the beaten tracks and explore. And I mean, we've been together. I've been with you on the program to Venice. I've also returned as a guest lecturer and I had the pleasure to lead students around Venice talking about historic architecture. So that definitely is one of my favorite places. Yes, to visit, definitely.
You're
Not
reminding me that it's nearly 10 years ago. Your year must have been one of the first that we took to the Biennale, I think, because we didn't do it historically.
It was really well done. I didn't notice that it was the first time. It was a very good study trip, definitely a very eye-opening experience also to go together through the different pavilions of the Biennale and talk about the art and the architecture and all of that within the context, within the setting of Venice. Yes, yeah.
So can you remind me, you came both as a student, but then you also came as one of our guest consultant lecturers for a
Yes.
later year.
Yes, I had the pleasure to give some lectures on the German art market and auction market and also the Eastern European auction market. And then I accompanied several field trips. We went to St. Ives together.
That's right.
We went to the Venice and Turin trip and also to the Maastricht and Tetrap trip, of course, where there was a lot of talk about provenance when going through Tetrap with the students and generally exploring the systems of art fairs, the art world, the museum world. I mean, that's the great thing about the trips you offer at Sotheby's. They always combine everything. We go to museums, we go to fairs, we go to galleries. It's a wonderful all-around education of the art world. Yes.
Yeah, I mean that's fantastic. And students often say, "Oh, do we have to go to Venice? I know Venice so well. I've been so often." And then they're very surprised because we stay in a hotel in Santa Elena, which is quite a quiet residential district, you'll remember, away from the Centro Storico. And eventually, students really, really love that piece, and to be able to get on the Vaporetto and see the wonderful profile as you come towards the Dogana and so on every day. I think people really appreciate that. And then they say, actually, I'd never been to the Giardini, I'd never been to the Biennale before. I've certainly never been in the Arsenale, because as you know, that's a chance to go into a building that you can't otherwise get into. It's not
exactly.
like usually open to the public. So yeah, I think there'd be a lot of listeners, Julia, who might well choose Venice.
I know it's an obvious choice. I
Oh
mean,
no,
I
I wasn't. That wasn't
don't live
pejorative
there.
statement.
I appreciate small towns. I mean, I live in a small town. I appreciate peace and quiet, especially with family. And I live in a town that's culturally very rich, and we have a castle, we have an orchestra, we have a theater, we have a wonderful Rococo ballroom, and
Wow.
all of those things. But yes, we can compare with London, where the museums are free. That's definitely a favorite feature. I think I would need to make like a mix and
Yes.
match favorite city, which has
Yeah.
the London museums and the Venice canals, and still have the size of my hometown, so very small. So minus the tourists. Yes, let's
I'm
do a
sure in five,
fantasy
if,
league of towns and cities.
exactly. I'm sure in 5 years' time, AI will find a way of producing this
Oh
virtual
God.
perfect city for us. The next question is kind of like a binary opposite. Like you've kind of almost touched on it, but is there a place you like to escape to, with your family, into maybe into nature or
Yes.
the sea?
Yes, exactly. So you caught on to that. The sea, the water, also the blue colors just relax me a lot. And I do love to go to the seaside. We have a German seaside that's very good for also the air you breathe in. But I've recently discovered, actually, together with another Sotheby's alumna, with my friend and colleague, we've gone to Lake Lugano, which is also, I know, a very touristy spot, but it's been the first time I went there. And we went a bit off the touristy shores. And oh my God, is this place beautiful? So anything with a good body of water and the right temperatures to swim in it and sit by the shore and stare at the horizon is good for me.
And Lugano, I believe the lakes have always historically been great favorites with people from Germany.
Yeah, is it Lugano? Yeah, Lake. Oh, sorry, I might have said it wrong. Lake Garda. I meant
Garda, I was going
Lake
to say
Garda.
Garda
Sorry,
is,
Lugano. No, that was
yeah, no,
sorry.
Garda, no, no, it's fine.
No, I meant Lake Garda. Yes,
Yeah.
but of course, yes, many Germans go there. Everybody was surprised when I said I had never been, and I don't even know if I'm allowed to say this on air, but
Go on.
there was a
Right.
spot. There was a spot to go swimming right next to a medieval castle, and I swam a few meters into a medieval castle mall.
Wow.
The the water grave surrounding the castle for protection. I
Oh, the
think all
moat.
my childhood, the
We call
the
it the moat.
the
The wall
moat, yes,
around the
exactly the
castle as a
moat.
defense. Yeah, we call
The
it a moat.
moat. I think all my childhood dreams and grown-up art historians' dreams came true at once.
That's
That
fantastic.
was a very intense experience, definitely. Yes, but like only a few meters. They hadn't really warded it off. It was just open. I was swimming there at the beach, and it was open. I'm like, okay,
Well, you didn't
lovely.
name you haven't named the castle, so no one will be able to sue you for
I will not name it,
trespass.
no, and I will say I very respectful and very short interlude of appreciating the architecture.
No, Garda I know reasonably well, and then I spoke earlier about my son studying German and spending a year in Berlin, but he goes with his friend to Garda every year, partly not just for
Really,
the beauty and the peace, but partly because in the hotels that he stays in, they're all German, and he can practice his German,
that's a very good point.
which is wonderful. But yeah, no, he loves it there as well.
It's beautiful, and the water has just the right temperature in summer. It's
So
yeah, and so much.
yeah.
Swim in the lake, and you see all those castles and ruins. And we also went to see a really big area of the historic villa from Roman times.
Oh, Catullus at
Yes,
Sirmione.
Catullus, exactly, which actually has nothing to do with Catullus. So interesting to read about that, to look at the ruins, and you see this original fishbone tiling
Oh
from the
yes.
villa exposed there. And already as a child, when my parents took me to Turkey, to Italy, it was my favorite thing just to wander around the ruins and yeah, feeling how would it have been back then. And yeah, trying to imagine you as one of the Romans walking through those houses and places. It's wonderful. Yes.
It's great, isn't it? So yeah, yeah, you've even got that ancient Roman site associated with the poet, the wonderful poet Catullus. So he does speak about his villa in Sirmione and Garda. So,
Yes, but I did
so
say
we
it was
can't,
built before. It was
yeah,
built
all of that stuff. Yeah,
before,
yeah.
so
So
um,
some people, I think the opinions are kind of split on that.
okay. Well, I trust you more then because you are actually an expert in the classical antiquities,
No,
and
I don't. My romantic side always likes to, when I go there, I like to read Catullus, but like Horace's Villa is another one that we're not absolutely certain. It's outside of Rome in a beautiful mountain location. We're not absolutely certain, but it feels right
it's
somehow. And then
amazing architecture, no matter who built it, right?
exactly, exactly. But Garda, what a wonderful location. And then do you have a favorite building, like a piece of architecture?
I would say maybe not building, but more, as I said, I really have a heart somehow for medieval castle ruins.
Hmm.
I like that a lot. I used to love play like knights. Actually, not even a princess, more knights as a kid. So I like that. And yes, Roman castle ruins, especially also museums when you have wall paintings. There's the wonderful villas in Rome that you can visit, and you still see the original frescoes that they were preserved. So this is definitely something close to my heart. I don't think I can pin it down to maybe, yes, maybe because I also have a very big liking for Art Nouveau, Art Deco, and for purpose design. So I was super fascinated when doing my studies. I visited the Glasgow School of Design, Glasgow School of Art, and the design of the whole building, where everything is beautiful and at the same time serving the purpose from the students' artists' rooms to the library, which we were absolutely shocked when a fire broke out. But I've seen it before the fire. I've seen the original wooden structure of that library. So I think that is one of my favorite buildings in the whole world. Just the art and design, I think one of the best examples of it going hand in hand, the purpose and the beauty.
And do you remember in Glasgow, do you remember this? You must have visited Macintosh's
Oh
house.
yes, that was absolutely fabulous as well. Yes, Macintosh. I really like Macintosh. Yes, he is. Yeah, I think that's design genius. Yes.
Absolutely. So yeah, interesting choice of building. And then music. Do you have a favorite composer or pop star, rock star, folk star? I don't know.
Um, I actually like a lot of music. Funny that you say folk because folk. I come from the town with the biggest folk music festival in the whole of Europe.
Really?
We have a festival every year where there's 20 stages, also on the castle grounds, by the way, everywhere in the park, in the castle, everywhere, and it's full of music. So I am very open. We had the pleasure to listen to Amy McDonald back then, and also Sass there. So those were two magnificent concerts, and that all in the comfort of my hometown. But I do think if I need to pick a favorite, it's probably one of the songs my husband has written to me. Again, very cheesy, but every year my husband is a musician, and since we were students, every year on my birthday he has written me a song. So I think I got to pick one of those because they really describe all the feelings. Every song describes a year and what has been going on for us, and especially since the kids were born, it's so funny. They're so varied, and yes, well, they speak to my heart.
So does he, on your birthday, does he come and sing it to you?
He plays it on the piano that's behind me and sings it to me. Yes, and I'm not allowed to share the recordings, but I really like it because
It
he's.
reminds me of the famous story about Wagner when he played Siegfried Idyll, I think was it to his wife as a birthday present? If I remember. Anyway, I may be wrong. Apologies to any Wagnerians out there.
I'm not so big on Wagner, but yes, there are some very nice pieces that were written for the women in the composer's lives. So
Absolutely. Well, that
valid
what
answer.
presumably you haven't got, presumably this isn't published, any of these songs. They're private,
No,
so there's nothing on
they're just
Spotify I
coming.
can guide the listeners to.
they're just for me. No. There are definitely recordings that he has done also in London, with Trevor Pinnock, for
Oh,
instance.
really?
Yes, he has just
And
been
can you divulge his name?
my husband, yes, it's
Yes.
Andrei Mihalescu. He's a Romanian double bass player, and
Okay. Well, we'll
so
put that. You'll send me for the
I can
description, for
send
the
you.
written
Yes,
description, and send me a link because I'm sure listeners would be. I'd certainly be interested in that.
I can send
Trevor
it.
Pinnock's one of my heroes on authentic
Wonderful.
music. You know.
He is so wonderful, and he's such a great person. I had the pleasure to also meet him and stay with him when my husband was recording, and was one of his students at the Royal Academy back then when he was studying at the Royal Academy of Music. So yes, definitely. And my husband is always so honored when he gets to perform with him, and it is so fulfilling to work with him. Yes.
Yeah, our former choir master in my local church, he's now actually gone to Munich, where he's working with the opera, probably repetiteur type stuff. His name's Chad Kelly, but he studied with Trevor Pinnock.
Yeah. Trevor,
Um, in the
maybe my
Royal-
husband knows him.
who knows? You
Might
could
be.
say his name's Chad Kelly. You can look him up. Absolute musical genius. I think he got the highest grade in music in Cambridge ever when he was there.
Wow.
I remember,
Some achievement.
I remember in the church because I used to sing in the choir with him. I remember saying to him, "Could you do today? I really feel. Could you do at the end of the service? Could you do the famous Vidor piece? You know what I mean, the organ piece." And he didn't say anything. He was very kind of modest. And then at the end, he didn't have the music. He just played it off by heart, just perfectly.
It's yes, it still seems a bit like magician's work to me. My husband
I
also
don't
sometimes
get it.
does it, and he just hides other themes in it, and
Ah,
so
clever.
at and other people do that as well. And my family is quite musical, and one of my uncles, who's also a piano professor, was playing the organ at our wedding, and my husband suddenly starts laughing next to me when we were marching out of church because he was hiding a famous double bass solo
Mm,
within the traditional wedding music he was playing, and only
clever.
all the double bassists in the audience picked up on
That's
it.
so music as you're very aware is another artistic language. And so I was just going to ask you now, finally, before we really talk about your work
No
and your
worries.
interests in the art world. Do you do you, is there a single work of art that you couldn't do without if you were on a desert island?
Uh, Again, difficult. I do have a painting that I think I would take a portrait first of all, because if I'm on a desert island, I will want to see another person's face. I will have my fill of beautiful colors in nature. So it's going to be a portrait. And I think it's going to be maybe the portrait. I was very lucky that I was given actually upon completion of my master's, I was given a portrait by my parents who were moving and didn't have space and knew how much I appreciated a portrait that always hang in our flat, which is not that special, but it depicts a girl, probably around 10 or 12, sitting there like, I have to sit for a portrait. I could really relate to that. she's really she's really cute, but also she's really like, I'm not feeling this today. So I think I would take that one. I think I would be in that, I would resonate with that feeling quite a lot, being on my own on a desert island.
That's interesting. I mean, presumably the artist isn't well known.
Not that well known, no.
That's lovely. I think you're the first person on this podcast who's actually chosen something because they've grown up with it and love it and identify with it. Because, you'll be the same, I'm sure. And you work in the art world selling works of art at auction. And obviously, if you've got a big brand name, it's very exciting. And that's what everyone wants. But you know as well as I do that every work of art is special to someone.
Exactly. And I do work in an auction house where, let's say, our prices are not that high. We're not flea market level, definitely not, but we are what you would call the low end of the market, I guess, or the mid end in Germany. I think we have different definitions in Germany from England of classifications. And it is definitely one of the features that I appreciate, because we can bring art to people that wouldn't afford the blockbusters, and they have often such high quality. And of course, we do have blockbuster names as well, and it's, as you say, very exciting, good for marketing. But so many of our customers, they really appreciate that. They say they find a connection, and they were starting really simple with very low priced items, and they developed the taste, and they had the chance to develop a taste because they could keep on collecting. And it's definitely, I think that there are many underappreciated artists out there. And as you say, it's about a personal connection. And I don't feel, of course, I could have picked a Vermeer. I connect a lot to Vermeers. I would have loved, of course, if I could take the Girl with the Pearl era, I would be very happy. And that's the opposite of the spectrum. That's very blockbuster. But I do resonate with that a lot. And there's even an impersonification of myself for a school project, standing as that girl with the pearl earring, and we were recreating the whole turban and look and everything. But there is so much art out there that resonates with certain people, and you don't need a blockbuster on a wall just to have it. It needs to speak to you.
I think that's so exciting what you've just said about, the positioning of your auction house within Germany, the German art market. It strikes me that it's a different kind of excitement, isn't it? When I take students to previews for the big evening sales at Sotheby's or Christie's in Bottoms Phillips in London, it has another kind of excitement. But I just love going to like the day sales and looking at, and going to smaller auction houses. I went to Rosebery's on the edge of London the other day for their old master
They're
sale.
not that small.
Sorry?
They're
Yeah,
not
I mean,
that small.
yeah, and they employ some of our students, and they asked me to talk about choose five old master painters. I did a social media thing for them, and it was just such fun researching these paintings, and every
Yes.
picture tells a story. A very famous. I don't know if in German you have that kind of motto. Every picture tells a story.
Yes, I mean, our motto is more a painting, also ein Bild sagt mehr als 1000 Worte. A picture says more than 1,000 words. So that's
Exactly.
common. Yes.
Actually, we have that as well. A picture is worth 1,000 words. I often say
Yeah,
that to my students when they're doing their dissertations. There's no illustrations, and only use it when it's relevant. But a picture you can put a picture in, and you can reduce the number of words because the words are very valuable in the dissertation.
that's true. I think we were all counting and cutting.
But it must, in terms of collectors, Julia, it must also be really, really lovely for you to see people beginning to get interested in the stories behind less valuable objects that have a story nonetheless.
Absolutely. It is very rewarding as well, because we have all levels of collectors, let's say. So we really have people that have been coming for many years or decades. The auction house is turning 33 years this autumn. So it
Congratulations.
is, thank you. It was established more or less as soon as possible after the GDR war came down, the German war came down. So we have people that have even been with us, specifically with us, since the first auction. And they are, of course, very educated. They know their way around. But we also have people that are buying, not necessarily out of the purpose of collection, but just because they live with art, and they buy and pick and choose. And it's a different category each time. We have some collectors that we really, when they start talking about the objects they're interested in, we listen carefully, because collectors can teach you so much. They have such a vast knowledge that you can only get if you specifically focus on this one specific detailed small collection area within the collection area, that you can just not do if you need to take care of all the objects. I mean, we have 3,500 objects each sale. You have a lot of work to do there. But we also do have people that come for the first time, and we're trying to encourage that. And we have those previews that are open to the public. And we also do a lot now that we try to make it easier and more approachable. We put 360-degree views of our previews online on our website, so people can digitally move through the rooms as well. And we started that in the pandemic because we couldn't open to the public. And we have also had before the pandemic more than now, and we are picking that up again. We have this a bit like a gallery talk series where in the weekend when a lot of people come, we have some of our experts pick out a few favorite lots and they talk about that and the historical background and they get in conversation. And so we get people that say, oh, it's like a museum, but I am allowed to touch everything. And that's what we're trying to say. You have the chance to get 3 times a year a whole museum, and you're also allowed to touch the objects. You can really learn to appreciate them. And it's so interesting when I have someone there that is trying to buy an antique or an art piece of art for the first time ever in their whole life. And they say things like, oh, it's cheaper than going to IKEA. And it's also so pretty and it's so unique. And the craftsmanship, I can't believe that I could like just be eating from this historic porcelain plate rather than a white no-name one from China. It's really nice to see this appreciation growing in someone who's just discovering it for the first time.
And then presumably over time, you watch some of those beginner collectors developing a taste and a knowledge for what, and presumably that is shared knowledge between yourselves as experts and the collectors. And sometimes, as you said, the collectors can almost become more expert than you are on a certain type of object.
Definitely, it's a community feeling as well, and I think that's so important in the art world. We all learn from each other, and ultimately we have this one goal: we preserve the objects. And when people often ask me, what are you for? We have the internet. We can go on eBay and there are auctions there. And I say, well, first of all, legally talking, that's not an auction, but that's a different topic. But I also say, well, we are the ones that are trying to help you to give your objects into good hands. The people that want, of course, we are there to guarantee anonymity where it's necessary, but we are also there to help people that don't know where to give. So we so often get people that come to us and say, I have this object, for instance, from inheritance, or I found it, or who knows, and I don't know where to give it to, and is it worth anything? And we do all the research and we do all the advertising, of course, and because of our client base, we find other collectors that appreciate it, and so we prevent this item from ending up in the trash or just collecting dust. And I see it also as a sustainable way of consumerism because we can pass on the appreciation and the objects themselves, therefore reducing the need of new objects being produced. And people that really look for it find it at auction. Not everybody will just find it. It's people that look at auctions, that look at auction platforms and search catalogs, and they see it and therefore they have looked for it, they appreciate it, and there's just a much more intimate connection to the objects than just buying it when passing by in a supermarket.
Oh, that's lovely to hear. Actually, I love the what this very contemporary idea of there's an element of sustainability in buying objects that have been used before, pre-loved, we call it.
Yes, exactly. I love that. I use that now as well in Germany, and people have been asking me, but I say it's such a good term, pre-loved. It exactly describes it. And
Yes.
also, I tell people that ask me, new clients, okay, I would need a table. I wanted to have a look, and will it hold because it's old? I say, yes, exactly. It has survived moves and coming here for 200 years. This will survive. It's not like a piece of furniture that you need to unscrew each move and then you won't get it assembled back together. This has proven it's durable.
I remember also, Julia, that on social media, and listeners should certainly look at your, we'll put that in the links, the social media accounts. I remember on Instagram you used to, I don't know if you, are you still doing it? You used to publish an object and ask people to guess what it was. And
Yes,
I never got it right.
that surprises me. Well, we want to pick that up again. Yes, to be honest, we had, yeah, and there are the dangers of our modern life. We were hacked a few years ago, so my
Oh,
private Instagram was hacked, and therefore the company account. So that one is gone. But we have gotten back our claim over the company Instagram, and we have been growing that again now recently. So, and there's more coming up, and we also do little introduction videos of our staff that just say what they are doing. So that might be interesting for some of the listeners that are looking at where jobs in the auction world. And we have staff showing some objects and describing what their everyday work life looks like. So we're going to publish more and more of that as we progress. And we're trying to work a bit now with integrating the artworks into everyday life and a bit of the unexpected. So we have this series going on where we've been presenting jewelry in the garden of our historic villa. So kind of connecting this design and nature feeling a bit and promoting it. There's definitely gonna be more to look out for in terms of those riddles. We had them as a Friday riddle, and we do sometimes pose questions of fascinating objects or objects with an interesting story. We have honorary vase now that was given for the appreciation of the Prussian emperor. So that's always something interesting to give a bit of history to the lots.
Fantastic. So that, yeah, I mean, we've already covered an awful lot that I think the listeners will find really, really useful and interesting about collectors and levels of the market. As you know, as you probably remember, our students on their out business, they often come in and all they really want to know about is the high end. And then
Yes.
gradually, I think they begin to realize that actually it's kind of as interesting. And maybe if I'm starting a company, I've got to start really at the lower end, and then they often sort of stick with that and fall in love with that as much as with maybe an ambition to move into like higher end sales. So I think
I
it's
mean,
really useful. Go on.
even Sotheby's, during my time when I studied at Sotheby's Institute, that was when Sotheby's started, and also then Christie's started to lower their opening estimates. They started taking in objects with lower than £2,000 opening estimate, and that was really, I mean, that was back then. It's then a bit of a shockwave, saying
Mm.
Sotheby's is getting into the low end of the market. But
Mm.
of course, you need to feed your collectors. And as you say, it's about an appreciation for artists, no matter how high they made it on the historical canon trajectory.
Yeah, and I think that shows also sort of signifies a respect for people who maybe don't have large amounts of money but want to start collecting. And you never know. I think also you never know whether those people might come into money and then you've got their loyalty. So it's a really, really good strategy, I think.
And to me, it makes sense because as we progress through history, more and more artworks are being made, of course, because we have more and more people that have lived and have produced the art. And therefore, there's more art to disperse. And it's great if setting lower entry prices will get more people interested in, I see them a bit as captives of the art. Because
Yes.
you take care of the objects you own.
Yes.
And I always prefer seeing objects in people's homes and they're being lived with and taken care of rather than dusting away in some art storage or a cellar. Often, I mean, with the private people, it would maybe be a storage unit. And I think therefore it makes sense to have a lower entry level to get more people interested into this.
Yeah, and that's one of the ethical arguments that we sometimes have in seminars on the program about, you know, particularly with archaeological objects. If you're
Yes.
encouraging people to buy these low end like terracotta Roman lamps, my archaeologist friends would say, "Do you know where that came from? It's probably actually been smuggled out of Italy." And then they say, "Oh, it should be in a museum." And I said, "Yeah, but museums don't. They have thousands of these objects. The British Museum has thousands of them. How many are on the display? Don't you think in some ways it's better than being there that at least they're cherished and looked after by private collectors?" And then of course there's again you come to the argument, but you shouldn't be purchasing things even as a private collector without proper provenance. So it's a very, very interesting argument that can't really
Yes.
ever be resolved. I was just going to come back to your education, Julia, before you took over your family auction house. And I noticed that even whilst at high school, you already showed an interest in the art market because you wrote a graduation project on, quote, the history of auctions and the influence of auction prices on the German art market. So if you wrote about the history of auctions, maybe you could give the listeners, because I don't think we've ever done this on the podcast, very potted history of
course.
auctions and art auctions, and maybe the way Germany fits into that history.
Of course. Yes, so auctions, they have been around for a long time. Actually, it's interesting because there are different origins of the word. So it's definitely coming from Latin, from, yes, so, and please, I hope I pronounce this correctly, from auctus or augeo, which is like to increase, I increase. And so you can hear auctions, but also there's this Spanish word subastas, which resonates with the subhastarium, which was the sale under the spear, which was actually what Romans did when they were capturing new territories. And they would put all the goods together in a big pile or area, and there would be put a spear in the middle, and then they were starting to sell off the items. And probably this was the first, well, one of the first auctions. Actually origins, I think Herodotus recorded it as the Babylonian the Babylonian marriage mart.
This is a dodgy story, isn't it?
This is a dodgy story, exactly. So you have those two oldest recordings when it was about goods that were acquired during taking over territories. So basically robbed goods. And then of course the marriage mart. What is interesting though about the marriage mart is that, and we do not need to talk about the ethical implications of selling off women. I think we all know what I think about that. But what is interesting is that they actually write about how the considered traditionally pretty women would be sold off in an upbidding auction. So the bids would go higher and higher. And the ones that were not considered as beautiful would be sold with the bids lowering until someone was willing to pay that price.
Which is, of course, the current Dutch auction system.
The Dutch auction, exactly. Yeah. It's what is now called the Dutch auction, and it's a reverse auction. And that already shows you that you already have those two different methods of auctioneering. And that's very interesting from a historical standpoint. And also that there was already a right of withdrawal. So apparently the women were allowed to withdraw from the auction contract, from the sale contract, if they were not agreeing with the man that bought their marriage license. Also, though, the men were able to refuse after the wedding if they were arguing all the time. Okay, let's, how that worked out practically is one thing, but legally it's very interesting because you had certain legal structures set in place. So you had a right of withdrawal, and you had also the increments of highering the price and lowering the price. And of course, there are those historical records also of emperors like Mark Aurelius that were trying to cover their debt and also state debt when doing auctions. And we have this very infamous auction where actually there was the whole Roman Empire for sale. In 193 AD, the whole of the Roman Empire was for sale at auction, because the Praetorian Guard, I think it was, they had done, how do you say in English? They had basically taken over the reins, and then they were selling it off to the highest bidders. And what is really interesting is just that we have buyer's taxes already back then recorded. We even have buyers and sellers taxes at different times. They were sometimes as low as 2%. And then we had them payable by the vendor during Nero's reign, who said, okay, the vendor, I want to buy at auction, I don't want to pay the tax, let's make the vendor pay it. And then Caligula did the other way around. He actually scraped the taxes altogether because he had a lot of debt, and he was hosting auctions over auctions over auctions to cover his debt. So you can see how the law has developed with the need of the people and of course the emperors, until at some point you had this official definition. And I think the Oxford English Dictionary was actually the first one to really make a proper definition in the 16th century, and it hasn't really evolved much since. It's still the same principle that we follow today. But as you have touched on, we have the Dutch auction. So different types of auction were popular in different countries at different times. The Dutch auction being reversed, always lowering the price. And in England in the 18th century, actually, the candle auction was much more popular, where you had to wait until the flame of a candle was had gone off, and the last bid that was registered before the candle went off, that's when that was the winning bid. And so people were playing the strategies like in eBay today, trying to put their last bid in last second so nobody can go higher. And this is fascinating. We also have France in the 16th century, where we had the right of auctioneering of the goods of deceased people and the decapitated people, executed people, given to osiers briseurs, and they were always two. And one had to describe the objects and catalog them, and the other one had to sell them off. So that's very similar to how we work nowadays in auction houses, where usually the auctioneer is not the one who's cataloging. I mean, I'm not the one cataloging the lots. I'm the one who's the auctioneer, and I have a wonderful team of experts that do that for me, for us. And the interesting thing, I think, when you say you want me to talk about Germany in this context, is that many nations had centers of auctions that have developed. So, for instance, we have London for the UK, and of course, we have New York in the USA. And in Germany, because we were for a long time not one nation, we were so split into so many little dukedoms and kingdoms, and it took so long for Germany to actually form what we call modern Germany as one united nation, and arguably that took until very recently. We didn't have such a one distinct center. We always had clusters, but we don't have the town where all the major sales happen. Of course, Berlin and Munich are big centers, but we also have Cologne, and then the auction landscape, interestingly enough, is quite big in Germany, but arguably even bigger in Britain. I find it fascinating because I also worked for this company, ATG Media, that has the State Gazette and the Sale Room, so the UK's and also one of the worldwide biggest platforms for auctions, for all auctioneers to put their lots into one single searchable database. So a collector that would look for mice and figurine can find all mice and figurines in all auctions at the same time. And so I actually went to teach many of those auctioneers on how to do their first sales with the live bidding software, because we actually had a lot of experience with that, being so dispersed in Germany. And I've noticed that historically grown, England has a much more widespread appreciation of those local auctions throughout the society. It's more of a how to say, a tradition. It's a family activity. It's what you do. You go to the local auction. It's going on. Almost every second little town has an auction house, and the population of England is smaller than Germany's, and you have almost double the auction houses than us. But many of them have even lower market ranges, as they're a bit more what we would sell in a flea market in Germany, have in smaller auction houses. But it's interesting because the tradition is so strong, and that was fascinating to me. And also with Christie's and Sotheby's always fighting about who's the oldest art auction house, and actually it's one in Sweden. It's Stockholm's Auktionswerk, which was founded first, actually. So yeah, two people fight, that one gains.
Absolutely, yeah. And yeah, talking about mice and figurines, just in case anyone can see this behind me on the mantelpiece, it's a fake Meissen, and you probably know a lot about those. So it wasn't expensive, but it's just lovely. I wouldn't want a Meissen personally, because I'd have to insure, I wouldn't like the responsibility.
They're not that expensive.
I know, yeah, I'm just saying that.
You check that out, catalog.
But it's got the little. Let's just. She's really beautiful, and I think this is another example that you see something, and it doesn't have to, it's got the. Wait a minute, what am I doing? There you go. It's got the.
Yeah.
Is that? I don't know whether you can see that.
It's not quite clear, but
yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like it's the woman who goes selling. It's a fortune teller, I think, who sells like little cards, and it's a little bit damaged. Her hand's damaged. There was obviously a card in her hand. There's a little basket with the playing cards in. But what I was going to say is that I picked this up and I love it, and I know it's not worth very much at all financially, but just culturally, it's just got such a history. I did a bit of research into the person that used to fake these at the time with mice, and they used to buy just the figures, and then they paint them in their own factory and sell them off as though they were. So we're getting into the realm of fakes and forgeries now, obviously. But just moving on a little, therefore, I was just going to maybe we could. I know you came to the UK and you did a degree in history of art and design at Christie's for 2 years, and then I think the final year you eventually ended up in Glasgow, where you then exited with a master's using the Scottish 4 year system of an undergraduate degree. Is that right?
Right. Almost. I escaped the Scottish 4 year system.
Okay, so you went
Um,
to Brighton.
yeah,
Yeah.
not to say that that's not a great system. Actually, I was looking forward to going to Glasgow for various personal reasons. Yeah, so basically, I did this 2 years undergrad program with Christie's Education back then. They had a very selective program. We were 15 students in the first year that were selected worldwide. I think 13 made it to the second year. I don't know how many graduated at the end, but so the first 2 years were with Christie's, and then I did for personal reasons, and because I knew I wanted to do an art business master's, either with Christie's or with Sotheby's, I decided actually I would like to finish my bachelor in the traditional 3 year route to then take the time to do the master's.
Sure.
And it was also very nice to diversify the education. I got a very classical, very good, well-founded education at Christie's, where we basically went through all of the art history from Babylonian times, Mesopotamian times actually, till about 1930 in the first 2 years. We attended the morning lectures of the master students, so we had our art history on a very good level with lots of guest lecturers from all around the country. And then in the afternoon, we had lots of handling sessions and theoretical seminars, and we went to the basement of the British Museum to handle 9th century ivories, and to the V&A to handle 18th century silver and all of that. And then I decided it would be good to have a bit of a more contemporary edge to my education, and Brighton gave me that by studying history of art and design, talking a lot about material culture, interesting courses like the history of advertising, but also getting the classical art theory knowledge well funded. So we talked a lot about Bourdieu, for instance, and that is gold. I use that when I taught your students actually, because I think those explorations of taste and class are so valid in even today to just talk about it. It's a good point of discussion and analysis. So yes, then I was lucky enough to write a dissertation at Brighton with one of the new professors there who was a specialist in photography, and I actually wrote about Julia Margaret Cameron and her establishing like the first brand of art photography. So it was about how did she, who's often not even seen as a proper artist, she was often still seen as like, did she do that because she just had a hobby? Was she even a professional photographer? And I was trying to take it a step further, saying actually she was consciously branding her work as art at a time when it was still considered science, the early photographs. And so coming from that, it tied in nicely with an application possibility at Sotheby's for the scholarship, which had an essay where we were asked to describe how art history and art historic knowledge has changed how we appreciate a certain artist of our choosing. So while writing my dissertation, I also frantically wrote that essay, and luckily it worked out, and I got to go to the art business masters. Yes, so the education has had 3 university steps, let's say, with very different focus points, of course, leading to the art business point, which is yet another angle to look at art and art history and the art market.
Fantastic. Oh, that's wonderful that at Brighton you worked on Cameron as an early woman artist who used photography. I often say to students, no, they're not for, Gursky is not a photographer. He's an artist who happens to use photography as his medium.
Yes, and she was consciously saying about certain features, for instance, that her images are blurry, and there's a lot of debate still nowadays where scholars cannot agree. Did she not do it? Could she not do it better and just pretend that it's intentional? Or is it true when she says this is the art aspect, this is what captures the essence. And she always marketed it as from life. And this is, I'm depicting from life. There's a, yes, there's this aspect of I'm trying to capture the essence of the sitter with her. And of course, they were very staged photographs as well. Interesting.
That's also very interesting, isn't it? Something that looks spontaneous and is actually posed. We're all aware of that, of course, with social media. That it looks as though you're a natural, and actually you've spent some time making sure you're in the right clothes, in the right pose, and so on. Yeah.
Well,
So
and she dressed her sitters. She did like tableau paintings, basically. She dressed her sitters and she put them
yeah,
into groups, and it's a bit like a genre painting or history painting, but she did it with photography. And she signed them. So that's one of the things. She signed her photographs,
yes,
which was not common at the time because they were
no,
considered science. And she signed them like an artist, and she was placing them in exhibitions like an artist's exhibition. So yeah, very interesting to contemplate.
brilliant. And so, your dissertation subject on the MA Art business at Sotheby's Institute. Can you talk about that and how maybe it related to your future? We often encourage our students to think about a future career path and focus their dissertation on that, because it can often lead to like interviews with art world players that then often employ our students. But can you say something about your own dissertation subject and how that affected your later work?
Well, my dissertation was not based on an interest of getting a job because I was in the fortunate position to know I already I have a job. I did my auctioneer license actually aged 18, so before I came to study in Germany, you need a license.
Yes.
So I in England you don't. Also
Yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah.
So I knew I had that secure, but I did want to. Um, I was really inspired by the upcoming provenance debates, which were back then still very new. And I remember a lecture where, for the first time, someone really made us think at Sotheby's about the responsibilities of data in the art market and also the responsibilities of legal wrongs, but the objects themselves have like a transcendent trend. Well, it's about like the history of ownership becoming part of the object, which it was a bit of a note I took from Brighton when we talked about material culture and how objects affect our lives, but how our life also affects the objects. And I think that's especially intense with art, and especially intense with art that has gone through turbulent times, and the decision to part was not voluntary. So I began to be interested in provenance and what solutions might there be. And I realized very quickly most people back then at least were only researching on art history and provenance related to World War II. And it was all about the righting the wrongs of the dispositioning during World War II, which I think is very important, of course, and it's still an ongoing topic that we still have to pursue. But I thought actually this is relatable to other areas. And is it relatable maybe to today? And I was really interested in research in that area. And I was encouraged to first maybe do a bit of base research. So I was thinking, okay, what is the biggest threat to provenance data? It's anonymity. We have plenty of anonymity in the art market. Me as an auctioneer, obviously, I know a lot about anonymity. And I thought, okay, let's really examine from an academic standpoint, who is producing provenance gaps in today's art market? Why are we still using anonymity? Who benefits? Who loses? How do we generate provenance gaps? And what are maybe other options? Of course, the dissertation and the master's wasn't long enough to explore all of that. I did come up with some ideas that I would like to pursue in the future about how to, well, taking a lot of claim here, fix it. I don't think we can properly fix it, but maybe how to improve the situation. But it was basically this interest that I felt I will go into this art world. I will be a part of this art world. I want to act responsibly. And it was just one part that I picked up. And during my whole course at Sotheby's, I was very interested in the legal and ethical debates. And that was also, I think, one of the biggest gains that I took from my future career. So maybe what I researched, yes, it does affect my work as an auctioneer, because I was the first one to actually introduce proper policies around questioning provenance at the time of acquisition for the auction house, at the time of take-in. We don't acquire the objects, but take-in. I have decided since then, I have decided, for instance, to not sell African art anymore, because provenance research is very difficult. There's been a lot of wrong going on, and also from a cultural aspect. So this has definitely come also from the ethical debates, that I always look at what are the moral trends, let's say, but also because we have started to think about the morality of certain sectors of the market. And even before that had reached Germany, I had already decided we're not gonna sell Africana anymore, as it was called. I have taken care to be more careful when it comes to provenance. When we had one or two cases where there was questionable provenance, we took it out of the auction, or we helped facilitate the original owners to get the object as smoothly and quickly as possible, because there's not always a right or wrong there either. You cannot just always say that the current owner doesn't have any claim. So I'm trying to mediate when it comes to those situations a lot, and do my due. And now I actually am very excited, because we will soon be joined by a new member of the team who actually can do provenance research for us as an in-house provenance researcher, which is something very few German auction houses can afford to do or want to afford, because it is a very pricey undertaking. And let's face it, not all of our objects, 3,500 objects per sale, need to have a provenance research, but it's good to have that as a side capability of someone in the team. The provenance, getting a better understanding of the art market, as you say, doing interviews as part of my research. I tried to diversify. I interviewed art market players from each area of the art market, from the museum world, from art fairs, from dealerships to private collectors. That was definitely wonderful to get those connections. I'm gonna meet some of those people again now at the art business conference in 2 weeks. So
Oh,
that's
yes, you're coming to London, aren't you?
I'm
Yes,
coming to London. Yes,
for the
it's
art
very
business.
exciting, and it's definitely a chance. I would encourage future students to pick a topic that's close to your heart. As you can notice, I hope this topic still hasn't left me. I mean, I had a business to modernize, and I took 2 kids in the meantime. But I do feel it's time for me to maybe pick up this topic again. It's something that can really lead your path through the art world, even if it's not directly. It's definitely good to pursue when you notice there's a topic that should be addressed,
Mhm.
and
And
maybe you
that,
can contribute.
yeah, and I think in the new millennium, as you rightly say, the Nazi looted art thing became bigger and bigger in the new millennium, and with auction houses being increasingly careful, and a lot of people, of course, researching and making a living out of finding the right the right descendants with good title to the work, but that kind of it becomes kind of flavor of the month, and then everyone thinks it kind of all the other things are off the radar in terms
Yes,
of, as you say, African art with
exactly.
dominance. So I was going to ask you, I know your recent interests are in the GDR, and the fact that there's this group of people that a lot of the listeners may or may not have heard of, the Stasi in East
Yes.
Germany following the war. And I think some of your research has been looking at maybe things that they might have confiscated from their rightful owners and maybe getting it back to the descendants of those owners or to the owners themselves if they're still alive. Could you say something about that?
Yes, that has a very personal note for me. And that's also interesting, because not directly personal, but my father, who is, let's say, older than a traditional father would have been, he has actually had the short opportunity. There was a very short opportunity during the GDR times when one could open one's own shop. Usually everything was state owned, to provide the economy with secondhand goods. So it came from this secondhand thought of, we need to use our resources. And he opened an antiques shop in that time. With his former wife, officially on the name of his wife. He was actually employed elsewhere. And so they had this antique store, and they were dispossessioned in the last years of the GDR, when it was running, the state was running out of money, and a lot of dispossessioning started happening to art collectors. And it was all very undercover, and it was all done in a way that blame was shifted on the victims. Usually tax-wise, it was usually they popularized cases of financial betrayal. So this was of course interesting to me because it happened in my own family history before I was born, but still. And this is one of the, as you say, one of the areas that provenance research hasn't looked at for a long time. Recently more, so there was a publication, and I think that's what you were playing at, that I have published in a book, in a collection of essays from and journal articles, a collection of journal articles from the German government publication that is looking at provenance issues in Germany and the art world today. They try to pick a different focus for each publication each year. And in that year, they were focusing on, they have approached me if I would research my family's history, because it was actually, he's one of the only cases that got out alive and unsworn, and kind of still in a way tricked the Stasi with their own weapons. So he was one of the people that got out of this in the best way possible. Although he still was dispossessed of a lot of art, he still had to emigrate to a different country with his kids. So he was leaving East Germany for West Germany after a very difficult time. He had lost a lot of his community, because the way that the Stasi acted back then is that they were spreading lies. So they, for instance, went in an attack to his store and then to the house, and they declared everything they could see, even family heirlooms, as inventory from the antique store. Although there were pictures of my great grandmother sitting in that chair, and they were the children's beds of my older sisters, half sisters, they have declared this is store inventory and you need to pay back tax for 10 years back.
Oh,
And
good.
in East Germany, tax was 90% for businesses. 90% of the value back for 10 years. And it did with every single thing, with every plate they ate from, with every historic tablecloth they had. And what they were especially aiming at is that his wife had a valuable dolls collection that she was presenting with someone else in an exhibition. And that's probably, so what is still not proven, but what is assumed, because it has happened in other cases, is that probably a Western collector had said they have an interest in this collection, and that's probably how the focus was shifted on them. Because ultimately, all those pieces, in order to pay the tax debt, ended up being taken care of by the Kunst-Auktionhaus GmbH, and they were put in a big storage unit and sold off mostly to Western clients for Western money, which was valuable. It was worth much more than the Eastern money. And this actually happened to a range of antique dealers and collectors. It's a very sad story. My father thankfully had a lot of supporters and managed to borrow large sums of money, and also to sell some of the objects for the overpriced ratings that the GDR employees gave. So when they overvalued objects, he was then trying to sell it to them for that value in order to get the debt together, in order to not be in prison. But it was very close, because most people ended up in prison because they couldn't pay the debt. Then the objects were taken, and many people didn't actually make it out alive. And it's some people made it out, but of course highly traumatized. And it was a very traumatic experience. It took a long time, months and months of interrogations. And thankfully, my father had a very good lawyer who advised him on the legal implications, and they were able, thank God, to prolong the time and use all the methods that I described in order to still proactively steer what was happening. But of course, he couldn't prevent it altogether. And there was now this becomes more anecdotal, of course. I mean, I looked at all the files. I have copies of the files of the reports. It's insane what they have reported, really. Protocols on every movement of my sisters that were minors back then, and where they go at what times, and who goes to the shop, and the bank accounts of all the friends, and who gave money to him. They had it all in the list. They were all getting statements of the bank accounts of the friends that were borrowing or lending money for that purpose. But so shortly after the wall came down, my father was actually called up by the local castle museum director, saying, "We have some of your objects in storage. Would you like to come and pick them up?" But that was lucky.
Absolutely.
Not all of them.
But going forward, Julia, therefore, is, we all know about very well-known databases of art that is believed to have been Nazi looted. Is there an equivalent database going to grow for this Stasi confiscated or forced sale material?
Well, I don't think it exists necessarily yet. I think Germany is hopefully, and I hope I don't say anything wrong here, they're trying to integrate more and more of those objects also into the lost art database. So Germany has its own state database, which is at the same time you can put search entries. So I'm looking for something that has been dispositioned from me and my family, or we have been disowned of this object, but you can also put in the objects you have found. So it kind of works both ways, like a search and find database. I do hope more and more gets included in that. The problem is that because officially it was a legal state,
Yes.
it is very, very difficult. There are I cannot even sum that up right now because there's so many implications coming to at what point in time,
Yeah,
through
sure.
what action those lots were gone. And often there was pressure put and the people voluntarily signed it. But my father he did get some, how do you call it, Wiedergutmachung. He did get a bit of compensation. He got a bit of compensation. I mean, it wasn't obviously enough for everything that happened, but there was a bit of a compensation that was done in the early 90s through, and it was a court case and a legal decision to give that he was granted the compensation. So he kind of renounced the rights to any further compensation in our case. But many of those cases also have similar problems when it comes to actually tracking back specific objects. It's so complicated. And
It
then
sounds much more complicated actually, because as you say, because of it was in a accepted recognized state, and that with its own laws, and so it would be very hard to unpick that.
but also to protect their families, to try to escape prison or worse, people often voluntarily then sign those objects off.
Yeah. Yes.
And as I said, the state orchestrated the debt. So officially in the state you were living, you were registered with this debt that was the legal reality you were living in. It wasn't right, but it was the legal reality, the legal framework. And it is very difficult to escape that or to even have the overview back then of what was happening. My father was lucky in our case because he was even tipped off by certain people. He was given an article that was published in a West German Berlin newspaper that was talking about a similar case, and that just suddenly appeared on the floor of his shop. Someone must have dropped it through the mailbox to warn him, and that's how he had an idea of what the intention is, because in that moment you didn't even know what was happening to you and what their ultimate goal was, because they didn't just come and say, we actually want your art and antiques for money and that's why we're going to do all of that. It took a long time to get the puzzle pieces together, and it took decades now to piece every single thing together. And you couldn't trust anyone anymore. They were spreading lies over lies. There were lies going around the town that they found 100,000 in banknotes in the underwear drawer or something like this. You know, they would strategically spreading rumors to discredit and stir envy amongst the population in order to prevent them from getting help and people to complain about what is going on. It was also a moral warfare in that way. Yes.
Yeah, I mean it's a fascinating story, and I think listeners will find, particularly people who are interested in provenance research, and there's increasingly more people doing that. Of course, we just employed a new member of staff whose focus is on provenance. So I think you're going to meet her, Liza. Yeah,
I'm going to meet her in Amsterdam for the provenance, for the future.
That's right. There's a conference coming up.
Restitution, future restitution. Yes, and I'm very interested, as you noticed, to pursue this area, also to try to act as a business in the art world, as moral as possible when it comes to those challenges, because as you say, as we have addressed, is often due to lack of information that mistakes get made, or let's say objects appear in art sales, not necessarily because people are greedy and want to enrich themselves. It's the way of objects going through the market. And of course, we're very happy to be able to earn our living with such beautiful things as artworks works, but there's a lack of information often on very important areas of
Mm.
the life of the object. And I would really hope, as you say, that the state, the German state, but internationally even better, we would find better ways of registering provenances, of addressing all the other areas of where harm was done and where objects have been unrightfully dispossessed. World War II research should continue, but I think we need to spread our wings a bit.
And of course, in Africa, with the Benin bronzes, that is the main cause celeb there. You may have read these recent articles that other people have now started researching that. They've worked out that the bronze that was used by the local African government to create the Benin bronzes that were, of course, looted particularly by the British in wartime, um, but that was coming from bronze that was being used for the slave trade as a currency. So the actual bronze that those are made out of actually has its own historical problems, you know. So,
I think,
this is only just the beginning. This is the tip of the iceberg in terms of provenance research into Africa, as you say.
and that's exactly, and that's where you're confronted with this. I mean, basically, with the fine balance of trying to right the wrong, but also just needing to know that you can never ever make up for all the wrong that has happened in history, and you
Mm.
will need to. I mean, as we talked about the history of auctions, it was used a lot for slave trade as well.
Yes,
Yes, they were
absolutely.
using it for Dutch tulips,
Yes,
very famous tulip auctions, but also for the slave trade.
yes.
Later auctions off. It's there's so much that was right wrong at the time, and
Mm.
we cannot write it anymore. And I think we need to be
Mm.
very conscious about it. We will not be able to rectify every situation, but
Which is
we
why UNESCO in the 1970s it decided it couldn't be
exactly.
retroactive.
And there's a
Yeah.
cutoff date, but I
Mm.
think it's important to work, for instance, with those cutoff dates and to also give spaces in the museums, in the exhibitions, maybe also in entries to just do a very educated, to provide an educated background knowledge about this, to sensitize the viewers. And there are objects, for instance, sometimes that we get offered for sale that, yes, they are historically very interesting. But I
Yeah.
have to say, we cannot morally sell this, not in the current political landscape, not with the ethical and moral responsibilities placed upon us by the knowledge we have. We cannot sell this. I often say to the clients, then it's very interesting for research purposes. Please offer it to a museum, to a library that can, for instance, handle this piece of writing or this object with the appropriate academic interest and care, and put a sensitive note to it if it decides to display it. I would not throw this object into the open market.
It's very, very good. I think that's a very good place. There were other things that we could have talked about, and maybe we'll have a part two at some point.
We
But
talked very
Julia,
little about the
I,
business side, really.
I think this has been, I think just coming from someone who has grown up in where you have done, and with this fascinating history of your family and your father in particular, who was hit by these issues that we really are very ignorant about. I think it'd be great for the listeners to hear about but also just your knowledge and your passion for working in that auction house, and with a love of objects, with the development of collectors. You know, it's just been great talking to you, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of all the listeners for sharing your experience and knowledge with them.
Thank
I
you
might
for
just
having
finish.
me.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you one final question very quickly. What advice might you give to, say, current MA art business or current students who are hoping to go into an art world, maybe a commercial art world career? Any particular advice you give them?
I would say now more than ever, transparency is key. I think keep it honest, keep it transparent, be educated, use all the chances you have to educate yourself. Don't be afraid. If you do make a mistake and you're honest and transparent about it, I think it's all right. You are not the first one to make that mistake, but don't try to hide if situations get uncomfortable.
Sure.
And I think especially dealing with art, you have a responsibility. So try to be as good as a part of that artwork's life as you can be.
Thank you so much, Julia, and look forward to see. Actually, I'm going to be away, unfortunately, when you're in London, but I'm sure we'll find another opportunity to meet. So thank you very much.
Thank you too, David.